And so this is, this is a great advantage that the Chinese currently have. I still will bet on a democratic system over the Chinese model, however, for several reasons. One is just the exhaustion of the export model. It's not just for China, but any country that is reliant on ever-increasing exports is simply not going to grow. And particularly now that China has displaced Japan as the second largest economy in the world, that was an unsustainable model while it was going on. Everybody could see that it was unsustainable. And one of the consequences of the financial crisis that we have just gone through is that the American consumer is never going to come back there, or hopefully will never come back. And you're not going to see debt levels sustaining that level of consumption again anytime in the future. And therefore, the growth model that the Chinese have been using is going to come at some point to a halt. The political problems of this model are several-fold. I simply do not believe that a centralized government with only upwards accountability will ever solve the kinds of information problems that are necessary to keep up with a rapidly changing society, no matter how high the quality of their authoritarian government. And indeed, the Chinese government suffers from massive levels of corruption, particularly at lower levels. And like all Chinese centralized governments, they don't really have a good solution to this. Final issue for them, however, is what they call the problem of the bad emperor. An authoritarian regime, when it has a good emperor in charge, can run rings around any democratic regime. They can make decisions quickly, they can overcome social conflicts, they can fix problems that in a democracy you need consensus and paying off losers and negotiation and compromise that oftentimes isn't there. And all of that you can cut through under a good emperor. But what is it that guarantees that you're going to have a good emperor down the road? There's nothing in that system without checks and balances to get rid of a bad ruler once you've got him. And that has been the classic problem in Chinese history all the way from the first Qin emperor that founded China all the way up to Mao Zedong. Once you've got bad leadership at the top, you've got a really big problem, and there is no solution to that other than the rule of law and democratic accountability. All right, let me end by saying a few things about the future of democracy and the model, the economic model that we've been following in the West, because I don't want to give anybody in this room the impression that just because I think that there are problems in the sustainability of the Chinese model that we are out of the woods, and that somehow simply because we have a democratic constitution and democratic politics that our societies are going to be free from problems. I don't have to tell you this here in Portugal right now, but as I said, in my own country, we have a system that we take great pride in of checks and balances, which right now is so checked and so balanced that we cannot make basic decisions. The way forward on any number of problems, I think, is clear technocratically, but politically, because we have so many entrenched interest groups, we are not able to come to a resolution of that problem. Furthermore, there's an important adjustment in the economic model that we have been promoting, or we, by we, here I mean the United States, over the past generation. The basic crisis that we faced in this last round with the 2008-2009 financial crisis was not a general crisis of capitalism. It remains the case that integration into a global economy, free trade, long-term investment, all of these things, I think, have produced enormous gains for China, for India, for every country that has participated in it. The problems that led to this latest financial crisis really have to do with the financial sector. And here, free markets really don't work very well. For a whole variety of reasons, financial markets can impose costs on the rest of the society that the manufacturing sector, the service sector simply cannot. And I think we Americans allowed ideology to blind us to the fact that these markets would not work adequately. And we, in a sense, were the victims of our own blindness in allowing this large shadow finance sector to grow up on Wall Street and then bring the country into the current crisis that it is experiencing. And so there are big problems. Every democratic society, and indeed every advanced society, has to rewrite its social contract in the next generation. Every one of our societies has undertaken commitments to social protections, to social security, to health in particular, that were negotiated at a time when people did not live as long as they do, when we did not have modern health care, and when rates of fertility were far higher than they are today. So every society is ultimately going to follow the path that Japan actually is blazing. Japan, in the next few years, is going to get down to a ratio of 2 active workers for every 1 retired person, and is going into this period with the largest budget deficit in the OECD. But this is a fate that is going to await every other country, every other rich country, absent a fundamental renegotiation of that contract between citizens and the state, which inevitably is going to involve pain for people, either in the form of higher taxes or in the form of reduced benefits that people have come to expect. And the question really for the future is, are democratic societies going to be able to handle this enormous transition? Democratic politicians oftentimes do not exhibit the highest levels of political courage in saying, we've got this big problem, it's going to hit us in another generation. If we don't take action now, our children and our grandchildren are going to be suffering. They're much more likely to cater to the immediate needs of their constituents this year and the next year. Am I going to have a job? Are my benefits going to be kept up? And it's going to take an extraordinary feat of leadership in every single country to make this transition to an economic system and an economic model that will actually be sustainable. Now, I still believe that China is also going to face this problem, and in a certain sense, when they cross that demographic threshold and their population starts declining, it's actually going to decline even faster than some of the earlier countries in Europe and North America. So it's not a problem that is unique only to democratic societies, but it is going to be a huge test of democratic institutions. Is it possible to actually reach consensus not on sharing the benefits of rapid economic growth? That is very easy to do. Is it going to be possible to share a consensus on, in a way, the sacrifices that people are going to have to make and the lowering of expectations in order to make our lives, and not our lives, but our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives sustainable into the future? I sometimes am accused of being a historical determinist, that I know the future. I don't. And so I'll leave you just with this thought that this is a huge challenge for all of us. None of us can take democracy for granted. Democratic institutions can corrupt themselves, they can become entrenched, they can become rigid. None of us is free of that, and we have to keep working at reforming them if we are going to make progress into the future. So, thank you very much for your attention.